With so many changes coming in Mr. Pandaria, it's understandable to mix some of them up with what actually happened in the Warlords of Draenor pre-patch. Because if you played Mr. Pandaria back in the day, then you know that we actually spent quite a lot of time in that Warlords of Draenor pre-patch, so some of the end game content can kind of get mixed up a little bit. There's a couple of common misconceptions when it comes to raiding in Mr. Pandaria and the loot system in Mr. Pandaria as well. And I can only really go by the questions that I get asked quite frequently on stream, which I stream over on Twitch and Kick, by the way. Come over and say hello. So all I want to do is quickly explain how the raids actually work in terms of lockouts, how they change over the course of Mr. Pandaria, what we're likely to get, and then to touch on loot, I want to clarify a couple of things around the personal loot system, and finally the dreaded system that is the Thunderforged system, or Warforged system when we're in Siege of Orgrimmar. So firstly, in terms of lockouts, certainly for the first few phases, nothing changes. So for the first tier of content being Moghasham Vaults, Heart of Fear and Terrace of Endless Springs, and then for the second tier of content being Throne of Thunder, everything's the same. You've got 10-man normal and heroic, you've got 25-man normal and heroic, and you can switch between difficulties on a boss-by-boss basis. You can't pull last bosses on heroic without clearing all the other bosses on heroic. For example, if you'd done Spirit Kings on normal in Moghasham Vaults, you wouldn't be able to do Will of the Emperor on heroic, and the same should apply in somewhere like Terrace of Endless Springs when it comes to killing Shah, which is the final boss in there as well. You'd need to kill the first 3 on heroic first. But outside of that, you can only do 10-man or 25-man on a character each week. Now, of course, this is assuming that there's no changes by Blizzard, like implementing flex raiding early, which is actually something I'd like to see. But if you didn't see me talk about raids in a recent sort of what should they change video, I actually said that I would love to see normal basically just become flex. So normal would be more the retail flex system where you can go with anywhere between 10 and 30 people. And then heroic is its own difficulty altogether. And this would be great for super casual guilds that only raid for a couple of hours a week, all the way to the super hardcore guilds pushing for world first. Because on the casual end, if you've got 13, 14 people online, you're having to bench people to go and do a raid. At the super hardcore end, you could be doing splits with 2 groups of 30 or maybe even 3 groups of 30, utilising ults and things like that. And it's just more loot that you can get for your raid team before you start doing heroic. Or even once you've already cleared heroic, you can go back and do the flex raid to just get more gear for the following week. But that is very much just something I'd like to see rather than something that's factually accurate. What's factually accurate when it comes to flex raiding is it's not added until Siege of Orgrimmar. Now, flex raiding isn't how you think you know it from retail. The flex raiding system in Mist of Pandaria is its own completely separate difficulty, and it ranges from 10 to 25 people. So unlike retail where it's 10 to 30, in MoP it's 10 to 25. Now the actual difficulty and the item level of gear that's rewarded from flex raiding when we eventually get to Siege of Orgrimmar sits between Raid Finder and normal. So you're still going to get better gear from doing normal raids. Flex is very much just like an additional way of getting some loot that's a little bit better than LFR, which was really cool back in Mr. Pandaria. But as I say, I'd love to see just the normal raids become the flexible raid system, and then they can implement flex raiding from the start. But anyway, assuming we get it how it was back in original Mr. Pandaria, we haven't got to worry about flex raiding until Siege of Orgrimmar, but it was the most well-received system added in Mr. Pandaria, and it was so well received that it basically shaped the way that raiding happens even today in retail. Now, you may or may not know Mythic technically was added during Mists of Pandaria. Now, it was actually the Warlords of Draenor pre-patch, but they completely retuned Siege of Orgrimmar at the end to be a 20-man Mythic raid. If you still play retail today, again, you'll know that 20-man Mythic is still the go-to difficulty, or the hardest difficulty, so that's not changed at all. Now, back in Mr. Pandaria, towards the end of Siege of Orgrimmar, and actually each tier prior to it, you could do cross-realm raiding. Now, we do have some functionality around that in Classic, as in you can group up cross-realm and do random dungeon finder, but originally with cross-realm raiding, it was always the previous tier of content that you could do cross-realm, until Siege of Orgrimmar. So at the end, you could actually do Siege of Orgrimmar while it was current content, cross-realm. Now, I'd actually love to see full cross-realm raiding as well added right from the start. And with the looking for group tool, which is really heavily underutilized on Mankrik where I play, actually being used, and it would massively inflate the amount of like random pugs that are going if you could grab people cross-realm. So you're less punished if you're on a bit of a quieter server, or even on one of these one-sided servers and you happen to be the really underrepresented faction. But the fact is, this wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. Back in original Mist of Pandaria during Siege of Orgrimmar, you could raid it fully cross-realm. So I'd just like to see that, but from the start. So every tier of content can be raided cross-realm, and basically almost everything can be done cross-realm. Finding pugs on retail for absolutely anything is so easy and fast, and you can just get in groups literally within a couple of minutes because everybody from all servers are using the same LFG tool. In Classic, that would just be amazing. So while that's not actually something you should expect from the Classic team, I wanted to mention it because it was something that happened back in the day, but just not quite to the full extent that I'd like to see it done today. And then onto the loot system. Now, a lot of people have been saying to me recently, do I think personal loot's going to kill GDKPs, or do I like the personal loot system and should their guild use it? Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but there's no such thing. At the same time as Mythic raiding was introduced in the Warlords of Draenor pre-patch, that was when the personal loot system got expanded. So technically the personal loot system does apply, and it is in Mist of Pandaria. But it's not an option in a raid group. It's not something you can turn on or off. The personal loot system really only applies to two things, and that's when you use your loot bonus rolls that you get each week in raids, or when you kill a world boss. So when you're out in Kunlai or Valley of the Four Winds killing either Shah or Galleon, that is then personal loot. When you're in a group that kills that boss, you're not going to be rolling on anything. You'll either get an item or you won't get an item. And the reason this is important is because when you're doing these world bosses, you don't actually even need to be in a group. You could just be running past and go, oh, there's Shah. Go and hit it once or twice and you'll get your loot. There's absolutely no reason to be in a raid group outside of being able to get healed. So while the personal loot system for normal, heroic and mythic raids doesn't come in until the Warlords of Draenor pre-patch, it's kind of in a sense. It was the first iteration of personal loot. And the last thing I want to touch on is Thunderforged and Warforged gear. So this might be a system you've heard about, or maybe even heard really bad things about, because I'll be honest with you, it's one thing that I wouldn't mind seeing removed. And I'm not one for actually removing content from any version of World of Warcraft, because I think actually they should aim to make content more relevant and stay relevant. But the Thunderforged loot system was such a misstep in my opinion. Basically what it is when Throne of Thunder comes out, which is going to be tier 15, every item that is not a tier piece that drops from a boss has got a chance at becoming Thunderforged. When something's Thunderforged, it will give it an extra 6 item level. Now you can use your bonus rolls and you still have a chance at getting a Thunderforged item, but it really overcomplicates how you're going to manage loot in the guild, because if someone's got a trinket that's absolutely amazing and they've got the heroic version, but then a Thunderforged version drops and technically they're your biggest pumper, it's better for them, but then some other guy hasn't even got the heroic version yet, it really starts to complicate things. And it also really drastically changes BIS list, which is the one thing that comes out of it that I like, because a Thunderforged item that's technically not your BIS will probably actually be better than what is your BIS if it's not Thunderforged, because it'll have higher amounts of stats on. Because of the higher item level and bigger stat contribution in general, once you reforge it, it'll probably end up being BIS. So the whole Thunderforged system just makes things a little bit messy and overly complicated. And it also heavily favours raiding 25-man, because obviously you get more loot in 25-man, which means there's naturally a higher chance to see more Thunderforged gear than if you're doing 10-man. Now, outside of just flat out removing this system, which I wouldn't be against if I'm completely honest, on a podcast recently I mentioned that my sort of happy middle ground for me personally would be to add Thunderforged gear only to bonus rolls. So the Thunderforged gear can't drop from the bosses. That completely removes any difficulties around loot distribution. You're either lucky and you get a Thunderforged item from a bonus roll, or you don't. It's as simple as that. So Thunderforged gear purely would work on a personal loot system. By no stretch of the imagination am I saying that's perfect, but I think it would be better. And really, that is how the raid lockouts work. That's all the different raid systems that you're going to hear about during Mist of Pandaria, a little bit about loot, and a little bit about world bosses. Basically, the world bosses now replace Vault of Archivon and Barad Hold, for example. So with each new tier, we get a new world boss, and that world boss can drop a couple of pieces of tier gear, a couple of pieces of PvP gear, and then PvP jewelry and things like that. The stuff that you're used to seeing from somewhere like Barad Hold. Hopefully this cleared up any questions or concerns around loot and raids that you've got in Mist of Pandaria, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're getting ready for MoP and you're leveling something on Cataclysm, consider picking up a Rested XP guide. Genuinely is the fastest way to level in Cataclysm right now, and it will be in MoP as well when the MoP guide actually gets released for pre-orders. So feel free to pick that up, and I'll see you on the next one.